Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Arizona Dbacks podcast, Arizona's #1 baseball and beverage podcast. Welcome to, as we're recording this, just after the Diamondbacks playing their Sunday game, when we've just come in an extra innings loss to give up the sweep to the Tampa Bay Rays. And man, when I said that I was going to be recording this podcast on a Sunday night UK time because it's friendlier as a time zone to watch the Diamondbacks, I didn't plan for the first one of the new schedule to go 12 innings. Man, getting swept by the Rays, let's recap a little bit. The Dbacks kind of looked like a team who kind of lost all their momentum. They fizzled out a little bit for the majority of the game, especially in those early innings in the middle of the game. They didn't do much to get started. We were obviously, Ketel Marte was sat today. The plan was to rest him for Sunday, and we'll talk a little bit more about Ketel Marte a bit later. But didn't really seem like anyone could really get the bats going for a while. On the commentary, Steve Buttigieg talked about it as bad luck ball playing at the Tropicana in Tampa, because wow, really nothing went our way in Game 2. That included, Grichuk not catching a ball because it ended up stuck in the catwalk of the roof of the Tropicana, because it's just a weird baseball stadium all around with its own particular rules, and each one of those catwalks has its own extra innings rule, and it just seemed to, none of it went our way. And that sucks. Not really too much we could do about that. Let's talk about Ketel Marte, because he looked to come into the game off the bench. He was available off the bench for the Diamondbacks today in Game 3 of this series. But it looks like he's aggravated that ankle injury again. It was just off of the back leg that he was standing off of, because he was batting left-handed, coming up into the extra innings there. This brought him in as they thought it'd be a pretty productive bat to drive in the runs that the D-backs were needing today. And it looked like it just sort of seized and gave up underneath him, and he looked in a lot of pain as he was coming off of the field. So hopefully that's not as bad of an injury as it looks like for Ketel Marte, who, as anybody who knows anything about Diamondbacks baseball knows, he's the MVP shout for the National League for us. He's been our most productive bat by a long way, and if he's coming out, of course, we've got that very good culture where, whoever comes in to fill in that position will do an okay job. Kevin Newman, Blaze Alexander, Geraldo Perdomo have that sort of middle of the diamond area tied up between them. And Kevin Newman was the guy who started at second base today, with Geraldo Perdomo at short and Blaze Alexander coming in off the bench. But man, oh man, that's a hard one to take for the Diamondbacks. They got walked off in Game 1. They capitulated to a bad call from the umps in Game 2. That was a Zach Gallen start. We lost the umpire's pant leg, basically. In case you haven't seen the replay, the umpire basically gets in the way of what should be an easy double play ball because it's tagged a bit of his clothing. It hasn't even changed the path of the ball. It's ruled a hit automatically, and the rules just did a number on the Diamondbacks for that one. And then I've been, as we sat there watching Game 3 tonight, it's been this more of the same, really. That strike zone was crazy today. We had 2 terrible calls on Gino in the 9th in this game, and the umpire was the less said about them, probably the better. I know Torey Lovello is usually a fairly relaxed guy in his post-game conferences. He doesn't tend to get all screamy, shouty like you'd expect, somebody like Buck Showalter to get, in terms of coming out and calling out all the nonsense from the umpires. But I hope we get a little bit of that today, because man, that would be justified. If we don't get those 2 strike 1, strike 2 calls to make Gino 2-0 in the count, then you're looking at a very different at-bat, and that there's the odds that Gino's having more swings, which probably could have won the game for the Diamondbacks, given the situation we were in. But let's go from the start. Let's go for the top of the game. Merrill Kelly was the starter today, and he looked great against the Phillies on his return from injury. But man, he really struggled today especially with his command. Finding the locations on some of those pitches were really a struggle for Merrill today. The strike zone got so big as the game went on for both sides from this umpire behind the plate. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But especially, bottom of the eighth off of Floro, you got a little kid, a Rays fan, who was jawing at the umpire louder than the Rays dugout was. And I thought that was, a little bit moment of brevity in what ultimately was a pretty miserable evening to be a Diamondbacks fan. Defensively, I think we were really missing Gabby Moreno. ADC was not a bad catcher, and obviously he had that big 3-1 home run to tie the game. But Gabby is a top 5 catcher in all of MLB, and that aura brings a lot of stability. The Rays outran the Diamondbacks pretty much all the way through this series. It was their running that kind of held their lead for them for the vast majority of this game and stopped the D-backs from really settling into any kind of rhythm, especially with the pitching. Merrill Kelly didn't look like he could pick it up, and we'll talk a little bit more about what specific areas the Diamondbacks could have done better. But catching people stealing is very much up there in terms of an area that the Diamondbacks should have been doing a lot better with. Today, they outran the Diamondbacks all series, and an interesting stat that came up on the broadcast, which is one I had pegged while looking at the numbers anyway, but I'll give credit to the guys in the booth for knowing it too. The Diamondbacks today gave up the record for the most stolen bases in Diamondbacks franchise history, and that's the stolen base that we gave up, not the most stolen bases we ever had. And off the top of my head, I think the most stolen bases the Diamondbacks have ever had in a game in franchise history was in that game against the Dodgers in the playoffs last year, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not going to look that up right now, because the last thing you guys want to do while listening to my beautiful dulcet voice is listen to the clickety-clack of my keyboard while I go and try and figure that out at what is now 10:30 at night here in the UK. Let's keep going on the recap then. Corbin homered in 4 of his last 8 games. He did that again today. He got another home run to really spark that little bit of a fight back, maybe a bit of belief for the D-backs. That home run also came to break up what was at that point a no-hitter that the Rays were putting on the D-backs, really turning the screws there. So late multi-run homers are a good thing to have. So I'm glad Corbin's still producing that, and against a different kind of team, that's gonna produce different kind of results. We've got 2 series coming up against the Marlins and then the Sox, both on the road in Boston, the Red Sox. So we'll get some wins out of that at least. I don't see us going through those, I think, 7 games that we've got coming up and not getting a couple of wins at least out of them. We really got to go to Miami and say, okay, well, Florida's not been a good hunting ground for us. Let's go and rectify that mistake. And I think this Diamondbacks clubhouse has the kind of attitude to do that. But yeah, the attitude was good. We just need some more consistency and maybe a little bit less bad luck. Speaking of a little less consistent and a bit more bad luck required, let's talk about Josh Bell, who has been quite a reliable bat coming in as the replacement guy to Christian Walker so far since the trade deadline. But he didn't score an on-base hit in the entirety of that series against the Rays. And, while a lot of things were going wrong for the Diamondbacks, he was one of these guys who, as a bit more of an experienced bat, you might expect him to lead a bit more, try and demonstrate a bit more of what he has to produce. We weren't relying on him for the big hits. That was going to the likes of Gino Suarez. Corbin Carroll obviously produced in his moment. But then you got the likes of Adrian Del Castillo, who maybe you can hope to produce a big hit as he did today, but you wouldn't expect it. Same goes for, Blaze Alexander coming in. Somebody like Josh Bell, who's that stable influence, you'd expect him to maybe contribute a little more than he did, but I still don't think it's anything to panic about. I'm going to risk sounding like a broken record from when I was recording the podcast sort of this time last year, where D-backs were just starting to pull out of what was basically one of the worst slumps in franchise history. But I don't think we need to panic. Demonstrably, this is a great 3-1 home run in the 9th by Adrian Del Castillo. And they mentioned it a couple of times on a number of different sources, but I first heard it in the recap from the PHNX Diamondbacks Recaps podcast. So shout out to the guys over there. It's the next man up mentality in the Diamondbacks clubhouse right now. Clubhouse. I went Irish there for a bit. But yeah, the Diamondbacks have the most ninth inning runs of anyone in the MLB. It's another one of my big stats that I'm popping into the episode today. I've got so much to talk about in this episode based on the recap of the game that's just finished. I've got almost 3 pages of notes in front of me, which is, there you go, there's another record. Most notes ever produced for an episode of this show. But yeah, Diamondbacks most ninth inning runs of anyone in the MLB. That's not surprising when you consider both the mentality and the kind of form that the Dbacks were in going into this series. If we look at the standings now in the NL West, Diamondbacks have dropped back one to third now because they lost today, but the Padres picked up a win. So the Diamondbacks now 69 and 56. Padres is 70 and 54. Dodgers extending their leads at 73 and 52. But in terms of the other stats, they're not bad. Dodgers have 7 and 3 in their last 10. Padres are 8 and 2. Diamondbacks are 6 and 4. But the batting averages aren't that different. Dodgers are batting .584. Padres are batting .565. Dbacks are batting .552. So yeah, we kick off tomorrow against Miami in the next series. Dodgers are playing Seattle. So it's going to be an interesting one. I'm not too worried about, the Giants behind us. They're going to go to Oakland and they're probably going to get quite a lot. But, Padres are playing the Rockies. We were playing, what was it at the end of the day, a very tricky Miami team. And an example of the trickiness that I'm highlighting here in terms of how the D-backs have ended up losing that one today is the running and, exploiting weaknesses in things. Another good acquisition that was made at the trade deadline was AJ Puck coming in as somebody who's under, he's under team contract arbitration for the next 2 years. We've got contract control for him for the next 2 years, so he's going to be a big part of the Diamondbacks bullpen, not just this season, but for next, probably at least the next 2 years moving into the future. But, he's got that big, long, languid motion, and that takes a long time to get wound up over on the mound. And, felt like the Rays had really had a look at that. Then they were exploiting that, and they said, okay, he's long, we're going to run on him. He's been good so far in, his 10 games, 11 games so far for the Diamondbacks. But, man, he was punished in the ninth. He hit the batter following on from 2 strikes. He gave up a brilliant position. He looked solid in the ninth where the D-backs could have, hung on at, that was... He hit the batter, and that began to become a theme of the Diamondbacks, losing their nerve a little bit as we got further into that game and into the extra innings, hitting batters, making silly mistakes, not finding the zone all round today. It didn't feel like anyone had the confidence to just go in there and pitch a fastball kind of in the zone and force the foul balls off. We were getting behind in counts far, far too much, and it's fairly basic baseball analysis to say, well, don't give up balls, throw strikes, but in that situation, you're walking too many guys and, upping the pressure on yourselves. And when you're in what is an in-progress bullpen at this point with, some veteran guys, some new guys, people who might not have quite gelled yet, and it's a bullpen that, the established order's been shaken up a little bit since, the effective bullpen of the postseason last year. Andrew Solfrank's now banned from the gambling thing. You're not looking at the likes of, a Miggy Vargas, who's in there at the moment. AJ Puck's come in, but Paul Sewald's just been removed from that closer role, and we'll talk about the makeshift closers in my next point. It's a slightly new look bullpen, so the last thing you want to do in terms of how you want to run through your order of the bullpen in a game that's going late innings and extra innings is produce extra pressure for yourselves. Kevin Ginkel was brought in as sort of the makeshift closer, looking for the save. Obviously, Justin Martinez is the new closer following Paul Sewald being removed from that role earlier in the month. And Ginkel especially dug deep as the pitcher, and he's got that very aggressive style where you can see he's digging deep to do what he's doing. And they fought to take to extra innings. I'm not going to fault the performance to at least get us to extra innings today for the Diamondbacks, but they'd been cruising recently, and Torey Lovello before this series had mentioned they'd been getting a lot of luck in terms of the 50-50 calls, and it was highlighted on the broadcast today as well. But they were not getting that today, and that showed, and almost D-backs have been getting used to getting those 50-50 calls. So, took them a minute to figure out that, oh crap, no, we're not getting any of these shouts, and we're not already finding our zones where we need to. We made a couple of silly errors. Merrill Kelly threw a ball away over into the side netting to the left of the dugout when he should have been throwing it to first, and that should have been an out, but wasn't. That allowed a man to get round and score at the end of that sort of sequence of play. Merrill Kelly honestly looked a bit rusty today. Dbacks bullpen wasn't the worst I've ever seen it. We've seen some absolutely disastrous bullpen performances from this sort of modern Diamondbacks era, but it wasn't the strongest performance. I think the strongest performer today in terms of the pitching was, the veteran coming in there on Floro. He did okay. He didn't do much. He sort of limited the damage after, Merrill Kelly started all right, not great, but then obviously gave up a pretty critical fifth inning where 3 runs came in, and, the homers looked like they were starting to become more and more of a risk. But then, moving through things, Jock delivered in the 10th to trickle on an RBI single on top of, sort of off the top of the bat. It really wasn't quite right off the nub at the top of the bat. It was off the end of the bat, sort of on the corner. But it trickled through that gap between second and first base, and that was enough to get it out into the outfield. It's not pretty, but it was effective at the time, and it's a metaphor of sort of how the D-backs should be playing at the moment. But, ultimately it wasn't enough. Justin Martinez came in as the closer, looking to hang on to the lead that the D-backs went and found, and it didn't happen. He hit his first guy in the batter's box, loaded up the bases, sort of escaped a jam a couple of times, but, that luck's not going to last long term. There was a quick mound visit that came in the 12th, and then gave up sort of an easy sort of smacking hit out into left field, and, that walked the D-backs off and got us swept. So, Martinez is a young guy. As that closer role, he will learn, but there is a while to come before he's sort of being talked about in, that Aroldis Chapman territory of somebody useful. It's a tough one to talk about today, because you felt like we were down and out. I was resigning myself as I was writing my notes, thinking, this is just going to be a very flat podcast performance. We've been beaten. We've been beaten well, and there's not much we could really do about that. And then they started to rally, and you think, oh, okay, this could be a slightly more positive sounding podcast, and then it just dropped right at the end. And I'd love to see the stat graph where they see the win percentage trickling up and down, because I have a feeling it was backs to the wall most of the time through there, and I think that's where the Diamondbacks actually do still play their best baseball, despite the fact we were a team that, for the last, 15, 28 days, they'd been cruising a lot and really having a massive win streak going on. And it was a series win streak. We'd won, I think it was 9 series in a row. You think, okay, well, this D-backs team's making their push for the postseason, and it is happening now. I think this might have killed the momentum a little bit. I'm going to try and stay positive and look at what we do have. But yeah, that's killed that momentum a bit. And, people were expecting a lot of this D-backs team right at the start of the year. And then, your problems struck so quickly for the Diamondbacks. You lost Erod straight away. He's back now, but, is not going to be pitching his best for a couple of starts at the very least. Jordan Montgomery came in, didn't really have a good start of the season, didn't have a spring training like everybody else had. He was a very late signing, and he said, my mechanics aren't there yet. I've not had a time to get warmed up for the season. And then you start losing people to injury left and right. Gabriel Moreno, Ketel Marte, Christian Walker now as well. You think, oh, here we go. And I think we got to look at it in the positive sense of, if we can keep the momentum rolling just enough to get into the postseason, like we're still hanging on to a wild card spot right now, we have to, keep in mind that this injury crisis at the start of the year, and sort of we're hoping that what's happened to Ketel today isn't as bad as it looked. But I'm gonna knock on wood for that one, because it didn't seem great. But this is going to mean that these players have not played the sort of entire season of baseball, sort of going into September and maybe even October time. they're not going to have played as much baseball as they would if they'd have stayed fit the whole year. So if they can just, get their rehab done in an effective way, make sure that there's no risk of aggravating or, redeveloping an injury, these are guys who hopefully are going to have a little bit of gas left in the tank to push towards the end of the season and hopefully drag the D-backs into the postseason. A couple of days ago, people were talking about D-backs having a 14% chance, according to the computers over at Fangraphs, of winning the NL West over the Dodgers, and in suitably streaky fashion, also the Padres right now. And having gone to Petco Park and seen the Padres play the D-backs this year, we were better than them when I watched us go head to head. But the Padres seem to have a better grip on hauling themselves out of tougher situations and just getting wins, but also delivering on what should be, in theory, the easy wins. They're gonna, I think if they go up against this Rays team in their next series, which they're not doing, then the Padres would probably take 2 out of the 3, maybe even get the sweep. Whereas we've capitulated and we've gotten swept ourselves. So I think that highlights a small difference in, I think, ability and sort of streakiness in form. It's not so much in the case of, the Padres have spent more money than the Diamondbacks. Far from it. This has been one of the biggest investment years from Mike Hazen and the front office for the Diamondbacks we've seen in a very long time. And that hype that accompanied that in the early season, looking for your trades and looking for your acquisitions, I think is what's leading to that air of disappointment when the D-backs haven't immediately gone undefeated for an entire baseball season. I think people got very, very ahead of themselves. There were people who were seriously saying, we were a contender for Shohei Ohtani in the start of the season before spring training really kicked into gear. And that was never going to happen. But it highlighted the sort of level that people thought the Diamondbacks were going to be playing at this year. And, Ohtani's gone to the Dodgers, and, that's demonstrated the level the Dodgers are at. And they're just going to keep spending money and winning baseball games. And if we want to contend with them, we have to win what are the tricky baseball games. We have to win what we would see as the easy baseball games. But the reality is there are no easy baseball games. If you're not the Dodgers, if you're not the Yankees, you can't just walk into, any baseball stadium around the country and say, okay, in 9 innings, we're going to have won this game. And it's not going to even been, breaking a sweat in a lot of cases. We are not that kind of team. We play some of our best baseball when we've got our backs against the wall, but we also have to be able to put teams to bed. It's an age-old adage in football or soccer, if you're an American listening to this. If you're 1-0 up, the best thing that my dad would always say is you've got to go and get the next goal. You've got to kill the game. And we have not been able to do that when we've been ahead. Sometimes we've been ahead and we've scored, 12 runs, and we've won games 10-1, 12-1. We've shut teams out in some places, but not enough. But then when we've had our backs to the wall and we've really needed to just deliver, a bloopy hit, a solidly hit single, we've just been trickling them right down the throats of, basic infields. It's been a pretty busy day over at shortstop for who was playing shortstop at the Rays today, because the Diamondbacks just kept giving them baseballs, especially through that second, third, fourth inning where we were getting no-hitted. We got to not do that. We've got to work on the mechanics of, can we just tweak where those balls are going to get hit, 2-3 inches to the left or the right. If you want to hit them up the middle, hit them up the middle when the second baseman isn't right on the base, If you want to hit them left, then don't hit them to short, squeeze it down the line. You got to look at things like that. The positives are the things we know we're good at, we're staying good at. Geraldo Perdomo bunted effectively right on down that left field line to move Jock Peterson up to third and get on base at first. That's effective. We know Perdomo can hit those bunts. We know Corbin can get that power going when he needs to, and he did today. We know Adrian Del Castillo is a rapidly developing bat and is probably gonna stay involved in this Diamondbacks clubhouse for a while. I don't think that he's going to be somebody who's back and forth to Reno for the rest of this year, especially after we've DFA'd Tucker Barnhart with Jose Herrera as the other backup catcher while we wait for Gabby Moreno to come back. I think Adrian Del Castillo is somebody who's going to probably get maybe 30 games of baseball under his belt this for the rest of this season without a problem. And that's going to bode really well for the Diamondbacks in the future. We've got a lot of strong prospects, and we've not seen much out of some guys. And then you got, the likes of Alek Thomas, who've just gone down to Reno because we had to make way for Blaze Alexander to cover off somebody else who could potentially need to cover second base. We have strength in depth, and I don't think many other teams in baseball right now can match the strength and depth the Diamondbacks have. Not so much in the sense of we've got big money on things like, I'll go back to another soccer/football analogy like Chelsea right now. Football's a team of 11 men, you get 7 substitutes. They have 50 people on their roster, and that's not including platoons upon platoons of, youth academy players in under 18, 19 that they've acquired for ridiculous money at that kind of age level. The Diamondbacks just have an effective system that does work, and the next man mentality in that clubhouse that Torey Lovullo has cultivated will see us through pretty strongly for the rest of the year. But as I sit here and I sip my rapidly cooling chamomile tea in order to try and calm down from what was, let's be honest, a pretty crazy game today, the Diamondbacks need to do a bit better in doing a bit better. But let's have a bit of closing statements going on for this Diamondbacks team today. We're moving on. We're looking towards the future. We got, series against the Marlins coming up at 3:40 p.m. MST tomorrow. Marlins, of course, these are teams we should be going sweeping. The Marlins are 46 and 78. Diamondbacks are 69 and 56. I will expect to win tomorrow. I want to see this Diamondbacks team bounce back in the most effective way possible. We're waiting word of just how bad that injury to Ketel Marte's ankle is, or whether it's, a reoccurrence of the same injury, whether it's a tweak and he just came out as a precaution. But hopefully it's not too bad. It looked pretty bad. But I'm expecting at least 2 out of 3 wins against the Marlins coming up before we have a bit of an off day. And then we are off on our way to Boston to play the Red Sox, who are in pretty similar form to the Diamondbacks at the moment. Red Sox are 65 and 58 at the moment. But of course, they're the Red Sox. You can't gamble on too much. The sort of standard home runs we expect to see from, people coming in. And I'm going to say Christian Walker as an example, even though he won't play. All those things over to left field that we take for granted at Chase Field, or all those home runs that, somebody like Rake and Jake McCarthy, who was a little bit quiet today. Those sort of home runs we're not going to get in Boston. You're going to have to put it over the green monster if you want that to happen, and I don't think that's particularly likely. So we got to do what we do best as this Diamondbacks team. We've got to go back to that thing we did to the Phillies, to the Dodgers, to the Brewers in postseason last year. We've got to get on base. We've got to do our running well, do the simple stuff well, create chaos, and with any luck and a bit of the wind behind us, the Snakes will be alive going into the playoffs this year. But that's going to wrap up this episode of the Dbacks Podcast, Arizona's #1 baseball and beverage podcast. I'd like to say thank you very much, as always, for listening. Wherever you're listening to, please remember to follow/subscribe if you're watching over on YouTube, or if you're listening on audio platforms, hit follow or add this to your playlists. Do what you need to do to make sure you get more of the Dbacks Podcast on your feed, now coming every Sunday night/Monday morning, depending on your time zone. Thanks very much again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.